Story 1. The Ghost Ship, Mary Celeste. I am the Mary Celeste, a brigantine carved from sturdy oak, born to cut through the seas with purpose. My planks have tasted the salt of countless voyages, my sails swollen with the breath of the wind, but no journey haunts the annals of the deep like the one that began on November 7th, 1872, when I sailed from New York, bound for Genoa, with a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial spirits. My story is no mere recounting of facts. It is a descent into the uncanny, a tale whispered by the waves themselves of a crew lost to the abyss and a ship left to drift in silence. The harbor of New York buzzed with the clamor of dock workers as I was loaded with barrels, their weight settling into my hold like a promise of safe passage. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of steady eyes and a voice that commanded respect, stood at my helm. His wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, joined him, their presence softening the rough edges of my crew of 7 seasoned sailors. The men laughed and cursed as they secured my rigging, their hands calloused but sure. I felt alive, my timbers creaking with anticipation as we slipped free of the harbor, the open Atlantic stretching before me like an endless dream. The first days were unremarkable. The sea was kind, its swells gentle, and my sails caught the wind with ease. The crew moved with rhythm, checking ropes, scrubbing decks, logging our position under Briggs' watchful eye. Sarah's soft lullabies drifted from the cabin where she rocked Sophia to sleep, a fragile warmth against the vast cold of the ocean. The logbook, my silent witness, recorded our steady progress. November 15th, 16th, 17th, the stars clear above, the compass true. But the sea is a fickle mistress, and I sensed a shift in her mood as we neared the Azores. On November 24th, the wind turned sharp, biting at my sails. The sky darkened not with a heavy promise of a storm, but with an unnatural weight, as if the air itself grew thick with secrets. The crew grew restless. I felt their boots tread heavier on my deck, their voices hushed. That night, as the stars hid behind a veil of clouds, something stirred in the deep. A low hum, not of wind or wave, vibrated through my hull. It was faint, like a pulse from the ocean's heart, but it set my timbers trembling. The crew didn't speak of it, but I saw their eyes dart to the horizon, hands tightening on ropes. The log entry for November 25th at 5 a.m. was the last. Briggs's steady hand marked our position near the Azores, 400 miles from where I would later be found. The ink dried, the pen was set down, and then silence. I cannot say what happened in those early hours, for a ship does not see as men do. But I felt the absence, sudden and absolute. The weight of footsteps ceased, the hum of voices, the creak of bunks, the soft cries of Sophia, all gone. My deck was still, my cabins untouched, as if the crew had simply dissolved into the mist. When the Dei Gratia sighted me on December 5th, I was drifting under partial sail, my hull cutting aimlessly through the waves. The British crew boarded me, their shouts echoing in my empty corridors. They found my cabins as the crew had left them, clothes folded, charts scattered across the table, Sophia's tiny shoes tucked beneath a bunk. The single lifeboat was missing, its davits dangling like broken promises. One pump lay dismantled, its pieces strewn across my deck, and 3.5 feet of seawater sloshed in my hold. Yet my cargo remained intact, my provisions untouched. 6 months' worth, enough to sustain a crew that no longer existed. The men from the De Gratia whispered of curses, their faces pale as they searched my quarters. They found no blood, no signs of struggle, only the eerie stillness of a ship abandoned without reason. The charts, the compass, the sextant, all lay where they had been left, as if the crew had intended to return. But I knew better. The sea had claimed them, as it claims all who dare its depths too long. The hum I'd felt that night, that unnatural pulse, had been no trick of the waves. It was a call, and they had answered. I was towed to Gibraltar, my mystery dissected in a court of men who sought answers in logic. They spoke of mutiny, of pirates, of sudden squalls that might have driven brigs to abandon me. They found no evidence of violence, no trace of the lifeboat or its occupants. The salvage pay was awarded, but the questions lingered, festering like rot in my timbers. I sailed again under new masters, but the stain of that voyage clung to me. Men whispered my name with dread, calling me a ghost ship, a cursed vessel, doomed to wander. Years later, in 1885, my final captain drove me onto the reefs of Haiti, a desperate act of fraud to claim insurance. As my hull splintered against the rocks, I felt no pain, only release. But the mystery of November 1872 endures, a wound that will not close. What took Briggs, Sarah, Sophia, and the crew? Was it the sea itself, jealous of their warmth, their fragile lives? Or was it something older, something that dwells in the deep where light cannot reach? I am the Mary Celeste, and I carry their absence in my bones, a silent scream that echoes across the waves. The ocean keeps its secrets, but I will tell you this. On moonless nights, when the wind is still, I feel them. The crew, the captain, the child, they are not gone, not entirely. Their shadows linger in my hold, their voices caught in the creak of my masts. The hum returns, faint but persistent, rising from the depths. It calls to me still, as it called to them. And though I am broken now, my story lives on, a warning to those who sail too far, too deep, where the sea whispers truths no man can bear. Story 2. The Vanishing of USS Cyclops. I am Lieutenant James Carter, Navigation Officer aboard the USS Cyclops, a behemoth of a Navy collier tasked with hauling 11,000 tons of manganese ore from the Caribbean to Baltimore in March 1918. My story is not one I ever thought I'd tell, for I never expected to survive it. The sea as a way of keeping secrets, and what happened to us, me, my crew, and that cursed ship, defies all reason. I write this now, my hands trembling, not from fear of death, but from the dread of what I saw out there in the Atlantic, in that stretch of water they now call the Bermuda Triangle. We set sail from Barbados on March 4th after coaling up for the 9-day voyage. The Cyclops was a monster of engineering, 542 feet of steel, broad and sturdy, built to shrug off storms and enemy torpedoes alike. The crew, 306 strong, was a mix of seasoned sailors and fresh hands, all under the iron grip of Captain George Worley. He was a man of few words, his eyes always scanning the horizon as if he could see something the rest of us couldn't. That day, the sky was clear, the sea calm. I sent the routine signal myself. Weather fair, all well. It was the last message we'd ever send. The first day passed without incident. I plotted our course, checked the stars, and confirmed our position. The Cyclops churned steadily north, her engines rumbling like a heartbeat. But by the second night, something felt wrong. I can't explain it any better than that. The air grew heavy, not with storm clouds, but with a stillness that pressed against my chest. The men felt it too. In the mess, conversations dwindled. Eyes darted to the portholes, where the sea beyond seemed too black, too still, like ink spilled across a canvas. On the third night, I was on the bridge when Ensign Harris, a young officer with a nervous habit of tapping his pencil, pointed to the compass. "Sir, it's off," he said, his voice low. I checked it myself. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on north. I recalibrated it, assuming a magnetic glitch, but the stars above told the same story. Our course was true. Yet the compass mocked us. I logged it, told Harris to keep quiet, and reported to Captain Worley. He grunted, his face unreadable, and said only, "Keep her steady, Carter." By the fourth day, the crew was on edge. The sea remained flat, unnaturally so, like a mirror reflecting nothing but our own unease. I overheard deckhands whispering about the Bermuda Triangle, a term I'd never heard before, but one that carried a weight I couldn't dismiss. They spoke of ships vanishing, of lights in the sky, of currents that pulled vessels into nowhere. I silenced them, but their words lingered. That night, I saw it for the first time, a faint glow on the horizon, not the steady pulse of a lighthouse, but something erratic, like a fire flickering underwater. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was fatigue, but sleep wouldn't come. On the fifth night, the engines faltered. Engineer Thompson reported no mechanical failure, yet the Cyclops slowed, as if caught in a current we couldn't see. The depth sounder showed impossible readings, thousands of fathoms one moment, then a mere 100 the next, as if the ocean floor itself was shifting beneath us. I stood at the rail, staring into the water. It was then I saw the shapes, vague, massive forms gliding just below the surface, too large to be whales, too fluid to be anything I could name. They circled us silent, their outlines shimmering in that same eerie glow I'd seen before. I called for the captain, but when he arrived, the shapes were gone. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. By the sixth day, the crew was fracturing. Men refused to go below decks, claiming they heard noises, low, resonant hums that seemed to come from the ship itself. I heard them too, late at night, like a pulse vibrating through the hull. The compass was useless now, spinning wildly, and our radios spat only static. I tried to plot our position using the stars, but they seemed wrong. Constellations I'd known my entire career were misaligned, as if the sky itself had tilted. I kept this to myself. Panic was a spark we couldn't afford. On the seventh night, it happened. I was on the bridge alone when the sea ahead of us began to boil, not with waves but with light, a sickly green radiance that rose from the depths, spreading across the water like oil. The ship groaned, her steel plates creaking as if under immense pressure. I shouted for the captain, but the intercom was dead. Then I saw it, a shadow, vast and formless, rising beneath the glow. It wasn't a creature, not in any way I could comprehend, just a presence, a void-given shape stretching across the horizon. The air grew thick, my breath catching, as if I were drowning on dry land. The Cyclops lurched, tilting starboard, and I gripped the console to keep from falling. I ran to the deck, where the crew was already gathering, their faces pale in the unnatural light. "What is it?" Harris screamed, his voice breaking. No one answered. The shadow pulsed, and with each pulse, the ship shuddered. Men began to vanish, not dramatically, not with screams, but quietly, as if stepping into a fog that wasn't there. One moment, Seaman Davis was beside me, clutching a rope. The next, he was gone, the rope swinging free. I counted 20 men lost in minutes, their absence marked only by the tools they'd dropped or the hats left rolling on the deck. Captain Worley appeared, his eyes wild, but his voice steady. "Full speed ahead," he barked, as if we could outrun whatever this was. But the engines screamed, then died. The glow intensified, and the shadow beneath it seemed to grow, its edges curling upward like fingers. I felt a pull, not physical, but deeper, as if something was tugging at my thoughts, unraveling them. I saw flashes, images of other ships, other crews, all swallowed by the same light, the same shadow. I saw the Cyclops herself, broken and sinking, yet I was still standing on her deck. On the 8th day, or what I think was the 8th, the ship was a ghost town. Only a handful of us remained, me, Worley, Thompson, and a few others. The glow never faded, and the shadow was always there, just below the surface. We tried the lifeboats, but they wouldn't launch. Butcher, a grizzled quartermaster, climbed into one and was gone before it hit the water. The sea itself seemed to reject us. I found a logbook and wrote what I could, my hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. Worley read it, then threw it overboard. "No one will believe this," he said, his voice hollow. That night, the shadow rose, not fully, not enough to see its true form, but enough to feel it. It was everywhere, above us, below us, inside us. My mind screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Cyclops groaned, her hull buckling as if squeezed by an unseen hand. I heard a sound like 1,000 voices, not human, not animal, but something else, speaking in a language I couldn't understand yet felt in my bones. It was hunger, or maybe curiosity, or maybe something worse. I don't know how I survived. One moment, I was on the bridge, the shadow closing in, the light burning my eyes. The next, I was in a lifeboat, alone, drifting on a calm sea under a normal sky. The Cyclops was gone, no debris, no oil slick, nothing. Just me, the logbook I'd rewritten, and the memory of that shadow. I was picked up by a merchant ship 2 days later, half dead from exposure. They didn't believe my story, and I don't blame them. I barely believe it myself. They call it the Bermuda Triangle now, that cursed stretch of ocean where ships and planes vanish without a trace. I've read the theories, currents, methane bubbles, rogue waves. None of them explain what I saw. The Navy lists the Cyclops as lost with all hands. But I'm here, a ghost they don't acknowledge. I don't sleep much anymore. When I close my eyes, I see that glow, feel that shadow, hear those voices. The sea took the Cyclops, but it didn't take me. Sometimes I wonder if that was a mistake. Sometimes I feel it watching, waiting, as if it's not done with me yet. Story 3, The Titan's Last Dive. My name is Dr. Elena Voss, and I was one of the 5 souls aboard the Titan Submersible on June 18, 2023. I'm not here to tell you a story of survival, because I didn't survive. None of us did. But the ocean has a way of holding on to stories, and mine refuses to stay buried in the abyss. This is what happened moment by moment as we descended into the dark. It began with the hum of anticipation. I was a marine geologist obsessed with the Titanic since I was a child, sketching its rusting bow in crayon. When Ocean Gate offered me a seat on the Titan, I didn't hesitate. The cost was staggering. but the chance to see the Titanic's wreckage up close to touch the edge of history was worth everything. The others felt the same. There was Stockton Rush, Ocean Gate's CEO, a man whose confidence was as unyielding as the carbon fiber hull of his sub. There was Paul, a French engineer with a quiet intensity, always checking and rechecking equipment. Hamish, a British explorer, had a grin that never faded, even when we spoke of the risks. And then there was Sam, a 19-year-old kid, wide-eyed and clutching a notebook where he'd scribbled questions about the deep. We launched from a platform off Newfoundland, the Atlantic stretching out like a gray mirror under a heavy sky. The Titan was small, barely 22 feet long, with a single viewport and a cramped interior that smelled of metal and plastic. Stockton piloted, his hand steady on the controls, while Paul monitored the oxygen and pressure systems. Hamish and Sam sat cross-legged on the floor, their excitement palpable. I pressed my face to the viewport, watching the surface world vanish as we sank. The descent was slow, deliberate. At 500 feet, the light faded to a dim twilight. At 1,000 feet, it was gone entirely, replaced by an inky blackness that pressed against the sub like a living thing. The only sounds were the hum of the sub systems and the occasional ping of the hull adjusting to the pressure. Stockton's voice broke the silence, calm and measured. "We're at 2,000 feet. Everything's nominal." But it wasn't nominal. Not really. I felt it first. A subtle vibration, like a plucked string resonating through the hull. I glanced at Paul, who was frowning at his tablet. "Just a pressure adjustment," he muttered, but his finger moved faster, tapping commands. Sam, oblivious, was sketching the sub's interior in his notebook, humming softly. Hamish leaned over, teasing him about his handwriting. I forced a smile, but my eyes stayed on the viewport, where the darkness seemed to pulse. At 5,000 feet, the vibration grew into a low rhythmic thrum. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong, like a heartbeat that didn't belong. I looked at Stockton, expecting reassurance, but his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the depth gauge. "Hull's holding," he said, more to himself than to us. Paul's tablet screen flickered, then stabilized. "Oxygen levels are steady," he reported, but his voice had an edge. I noticed Sam had stopped sketching. He was staring at the hull, his pencil frozen mid-stroke. "Something's out there," Sam whispered suddenly, his voice barely audible. We all turned to him, then to the viewport. There was nothing but black. "It's just the pressure, kid," Hamish said, ruffling Sam's hair. But I saw it too, a faint flicker, like a shadow moving just beyond the sub's lights. It was gone before I could be sure. The ocean plays tricks, I told myself. At these depths, the mind conjures phantoms. At 8,000 feet, the thrum became a groan, a deep metallic wail that seemed to come from the sub itself. Paul's tablet screen flickered again, this time showing a brief spike in external pressure. "That's not possible," he muttered, recalibrating the sensors. Stockton's hands tightened on the controls. "We're fine," he said, but his voice was clipped. The hull groaned again, louder, and I felt a cold sweat prickling my skin. Sam's eyes were wide, his notebook forgotten on the floor. Hamish, still trying to keep things light, started talking about the Titanic's bow, how we'd see it soon, but his words felt hollow. Then it happened. At 10,000 feet, a sharp crack echoed through the sub like a gunshot in a confined space. We froze. Paul's tablet went dark for a full 3 seconds before rebooting. "Hull integrity is at 98%, he said, his voice shaking. "We're still within limits." But the groans were constant now, a chorus of tortured metal. I pressed my hand against the hull, feeling the vibrations, and it was cold. Colder than it should have been. Outside the viewport, the darkness seemed to writhe, as if the ocean itself were alive and angry. "Stockton, we need to ascend," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. He shook his head. "We're too close. The Titanic's right below us. We can do this." His confidence, once inspiring, now felt reckless. Paul backed me up. "We're seeing anomalies. We should abort." But Stockton's eyes were locked on the depth gauge, his hands unmoving. "We're at 11,000 feet. We're almost there." Sam whimpered a small, broken sound. "I saw it again," he said, pointing at the viewport. "Something moved." This time, we all looked. The sub's lights caught nothing but sediment swirling in the current, but the darkness beyond felt heavier, denser, like it was watching us. Hamish tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. The hull groaned again, and then silence. Absolute suffocating silence. The systems hummed, but the groan stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that was worse. At 12,000 feet, the sub's lights flickered. Paul's tablet froze, then displayed a cascade of error messages. "Pressure sensors are offline," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Stockton cursed under his breath, adjusting the controls, but the sub felt sluggish, unresponsive. I looked at the viewport, and this time I saw it, a shape, fleeting but unmistakable, darting past the edge of the light. It wasn't a fish or a piece of debris. It was too large, too deliberate. My heart pounded, and I gripped the edge of my seat. "Stockton, get us up, now," I said, my voice sharp. He didn't argue this time. He pulled back on the controls, but the sub didn't respond. The lights flickered again, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Sam screamed, a raw, terrified sound that echoed in the confined space. Hamish grabbed his hand, whispering reassurances, but his own voice trembled. Paul was frantically rebooting the systems, his fingers shaking. The hull groaned once more, a long, drawn-out wail that felt like the sub was pleading. Then the pressure hit. It wasn't a sound or a vibration. It was a force, a crushing weight that seemed to press in from all sides. The hull creaked louder than ever, and I heard a faint, sickening pop, like a seam giving way. "Hull integrity is at 92%, Paul shouted, his voice breaking. "We're losing structural cohesion." Stockton was yelling now, slamming the controls, but the sub was dead, unresponsive. The darkness outside the viewport was absolute, but I could feel it, something vast, something ancient, pressing against us. Sam was sobbing, his notebook crumpled under his feet. Hamish was silent, his face pale in the dim glow of the emergency lights. Paul's tablet went dark again, and this time it didn't come back. The hull groaned, then cracked, a sound so loud it felt like it split my skull. Water sprayed in, a needle-thin jet that sliced through the air, cold and merciless. I screamed, grabbing for something, anything to hold on to. The sub lurched, tilting violently, and I saw it again. Outside the viewport, a shape, massive and indistinct, moving with terrifying purpose. "Hold on!" Stockton shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of water. The hull buckled, the carbon fiber splintering like glass. The last thing I saw was Sam's face, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Then the ocean took us. There was no light, no sound, just a crushing void. The implosion was instant, they say, 5,500 pounds per square inch, collapsing the Titan in a fraction of a second. But I felt it. I felt the ocean's wrath, its hunger, as it claimed us. They found our debris scattered across the Titanic's wreckage, twisted fragments of metal and traces of DNA, all that remained of 5 lives snuffed out in the deep. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe the ocean doesn't let go of its stories. Maybe it wants you to know what it's like to chase the abyss and lose. The Titanic lies there still, 12,500 feet down, waiting. And something else waits with it. Something that moves in the dark. Something that knows the taste of hubris. Story 4. Monsters of the Deep, A Sailor's Tale. I am Ensign Daniel Harper, a young sonar technician aboard the USS Stein, a Navy frigate slicing through the Pacific's endless expanse in the autumn of 1978. The ocean was my world, its rhythms, its depths, its secrets. I'd joined the Navy to escape the monotony of a small-town life, chasing adventure on the high seas. But nothing could have prepared me for what we encountered out there, in the black heart of the Pacific. This is my story, etched in memory like claw marks on steel. A tale of terror that began with a flicker on my sonar screen and ended with a nightmare no sailor could forget. It was a moonless night, the kind where the line between sea and sky vanishes, leaving you adrift in a void. The Stein was running anti-submarine drills, standard ops for a Knox-class frigate. My station was the sonar room, a cramped, humming chamber lit by the green glow of screens. I monitored the ANS QS-26 sonar, a beast of a system housed in a dome beneath the ship's bow. It was our ears in the deep, pinging the abyss for threats, Soviet subs mostly. That night, the sea was quiet, the pings echoing back with nothing but the usual chatter of fish and currents. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the ship's engines a steady pulse, when the sonar feed glitched. A sharp, erratic spike cut across my screen like a scream in the silence. I adjusted the gain, thinking it was interference, maybe a thermocline or a school of fish scattering the signal. But the spike returned, stronger, a chaotic smear of noise that didn't match any signature in our database. "Lieutenant," I called to my supervisor, "something's off with the sonar. I'm getting a contact, but it's wrong." Lieutenant Carter, a grizzled officer who'd seen his share of false positives, peered over my shoulder. "Run a diagnostic," he grunted. I did, but the system checked out. The signal grew louder, closer, a pulsing mass that seemed to writhe on the screen. Then, with a final flicker, the sonar went dead. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos. Captain Reynolds ordered us to maintain position, but without sonar, we were blind. The sea felt heavier, as if it were watching us. "Harper," Carter barked, "get me a status on that dome." I tried rebooting the system, but it was no use. The sonar was offline, and the silence was deafening. The captain made the call to return to port in San Diego. We limped back, the crew on edge, whispering about equipment failures or worse. I couldn't shake the image of that signal. It shaped like something alive, something immense, moving with purpose. When we reached the naval yard, the real horror began. The Stein was hoisted onto the slip, and I joined the inspection team at the bow. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. The sonar dome, a massive bulb of reinforced steel and rubber, coated with no fall to keep marine life at bay, was ravaged. Gashes, some 4 feet long, tore through the coating like paper. Deep scratches crisscrossed the surface, and at the bottom of the worst wounds were curved, jagged marks, claw-like, embedded in the metal. The crew fell silent, staring at the damage. It wasn't corrosion or a collision with a reef. It looked like the dome had been mauled. "Jesus," muttered Chief Petty Officer Malone, a hulking man who never flinched. "What the hell does that?" I traced one of the gashes with my finger, the rubber peeling away in strips. The claw marks were the worst, large, hooked, and unnaturally precise, like something had latched on and refused to let go. The air grew thick with unease. We weren't just looking at damage. We were looking at evidence of a fight. The Navy called in experts, including F.G. Wood, a marine biologist with a reputation for tackling the unexplainable. He arrived the next day, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a clipboard. He studied the dome for hours, measuring the gashes, photographing the claw marks. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "These marks," he said, "they're consistent with the suction cups of a cephalopod. But the size, the hooks that made these would belong to something around 45 meters long. The number hung in the air, 150 feet, longer than the Stein itself." The crew exchanged glances. Cephalopod meant squid, and not just any squid. Wood mentioned the colossal squid Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, a deep-sea monster rarely seen, armed with swiveling hooks on its tentacles instead of mere suckers. He showed us sketches of the creature, its beak like a guillotine, its arms lined with hooks that could shred flesh. "The dome's damage matches the hook patterns," Wood said. "This wasn't a glancing blow. Something grabbed it, held on, and tore." That night, I couldn't sleep. The ship was docked, but I felt it rocking, as if the sea itself were clawing at us. I kept replaying the sonar spike in my mind, its unnatural shape, its sudden silence. Had that been the creature? Had it sensed our pings, our intrusion into its domain, and struck back? The crew's jokes about sea monsters didn't feel funny anymore. We'd all seen the dome. We knew something was out there. Days passed, and the investigation deepened. Divers scoured the hull for more evidence, but found only faint scratches trailing aft, as if the thing had dragged itself along the ship before letting go. Metallurgists analyzed the claw marks, confirming they were made by organic material. Chitin, like a crab's claw, but far stronger. The Navy classified the incident, but rumors spread among the crew. Some said the squid had mistaken the dome for prey, its rubbery coating mimicking the texture of a whale. Others thought it was territorial, attacking what it saw as a rival in the deep. I didn't know what to believe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had targeted us. A week later, I was reassigned to temporary shore duty while the Stein underwent repairs. But the ocean wasn't done with me. I volunteered for a follow-up survey mission on a smaller vessel, the RV Triton, tasked with probing the same coordinates where the Stein's sonar failed. I told myself it was for answers, but part of me wanted to face the thing that had haunted my dreams. The Triton was equipped with deep-sea cameras and a towed sonar array. We sailed out under a gray sky, the Pacific stretching endless and cold. At the site, we deployed the array and waited. Hours passed with nothing but static. Then, at 0200 hours, the sonar pinged a massive contact, deeper than anything we'd seen. The screen lit up with a shape that dwarfed our vessel, its outline jagged and shifting. "Contact at 800 meters," I reported, my voice tight. The captain ordered the cameras lowered. The feed was grainy, the water a murky green. But then something moved, a flash of a limb, thick as a tree trunk, lined with glinting hooks. The camera shuddered, and the feed cut out. The sonar contact vanished. Panic gripped the Triton's bridge. The captain ordered full speed to the surface, but the ship lurched, a deep groan echoing through the hull. I stumbled to the deck, gripping the rail as the sea churned below. Something massive broke the surface, a tentacle, glistening and gray, arcing over the waves before sinking back into the depths. The crew screamed, but I stood frozen, staring at the spot where it had vanished. It was real. It was out there. We returned to port with no footage, no proof, just our stories in a dented sonar array. The Navy buried the Triton incident alongside the Steins, but I couldn't let it go. I pored over charts, old logs, anything that might explain what we'd faced. I found whispers of similar attacks, unexplained damage to ships, sonar failures, crews reporting shapes in the deep. The ocean was vast, and we were intruders, probing depths we barely understood. Months later, I left the Navy. I couldn't face the sea anymore, not after feeling its weight, its malice. I still dream of that night on the Stein. Story 5. The Ghost Ship's Tale. I am the Mary Celeste, a brigantine carved from sturdy oak, born in the shipyards of Nova Scotia in 1861. My timbers creak with the weight of a story no living soul can fully tell, a tale etched into my hull by the sea's cruel hand. By December 1872, I was a ghost adrift on the Atlantic, my sails tattered, my decks silent, my crew vanished. I speak now to you, the listener, to unravel the horror that left me forsaken, a legend whispered in the salt-stained taverns of mariners. Listen closely, for the ocean keeps its secrets, but I will share mine through the fog of that cursed voyage. It began in New York Harbor, November 7th, 1872. My holds were heavy with 1,701 barrels of industrial cargo, bound for Genoa under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of iron will and sharp eyes. His wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, joined us along with 7 crewmen, hardened sailors who knew the sea's moods. The air was crisp, the sky bruised with clouds as we slipped from the dock. I felt the weight of their footsteps, the hum of their voices, the hope of a routine crossing. But the sea is no respecter of plans. It watches, it waits. The first days were unremarkable. My sails caught steady winds, and the crew worked in rhythm, hauling lines, scrubbing decks, checking my rigging. Sarah played soft tunes on her melodeon in the captain's cabin, lulling Sophia to sleep. But by the 3rd night, something shifted. The wind carried a low moan, not of storm, but of something older, deeper, like the sea itself was exhaling a warning. I felt it in my planks, a tremor no human could sense. The crew grew uneasy, their laughter replaced by glances over their shoulders as if the horizon hid eyes. On the 10th day, a fog rolled in, thick as wet ash. It clung to my masts, draped my decks, and swallowed the stars. The compass spun lazily, no longer true. Briggs paced the quarterdeck, his boots heavy, his logbook entries terse. "Fog unnatural, men restless," he wrote. I could feel their fear, a pulse in the air. That night, the first event unfolded. The forward hatch, secured tight, was found ajar at dawn. No storm, no wave, no hand could explain it. The crew whispered of tricks, but their eyes betrayed dread. Something had moved in the night, and I, the ship, felt its presence. A shadow that lingered in my hold, too fleeting to name. By the 12th day, the fog had not lifted. It pressed closer, muffling sound, turning the world to a gray void. The crew's work slowed. They moved as if wading through dreams. Then came the second event. The ship's bell, mounted firm, rang out in the dead of night. Not a single chime, but a frantic peal as if struck by unseen hands. The men rushed from their bunks, lanterns swinging, but found nothing. Briggs ordered silence, his voice sharp, but I felt his heart race. Sophia whimpered in her mother's arms, and Sarah's music ceased. The crew began to avoid the lower decks, claiming the air there was too thick, too cold. I knew why. Something prowled my corridors, brushing against my timbers, leaving no trace but dread. On the 15th day, the third event struck. The ship's chronometer, vital for navigation, stopped. Its gears, oiled and precise, froze at 3:17 a.m. Briggs and his first mate, Albert Richardson, dismantled it, finding no fault, no rust, no reason. Yet it refused to tick. The men spoke in hushed tones of curses, though Briggs snapped at them to focus. He ordered a sounding to check the sea's depth, but the lead line came up tangled as if caught by something below. I felt it then, a pressure against my hull, not of waves, but of intent, as if the ocean itself resented my passage. That night, a crewman named Volkert swore he saw a figure at the bow, pale and still, staring into the fog. When he approached, it was gone. The fog grew heavier, and so did the silence. The crew stopped singing, stopped talking, stopped meeting each other's eyes. On the 18th day, the fourth event unfolded. The ship's pump, one of two, was found shattered, not broken, but torn apart, its iron components twisted like soft clay. The men pumped the bilge by hand, but water lingered in my hold, sloshing without source. Briggs, ever practical, inspected every inch of my hull for leaks, finding none. Yet the water remained cold and heavy, as if it belonged to another sea. Sarah clutched Sophia tighter, her face pale, her eyes searching the fog for answers I could not give. By the 20th day, the crew was unraveling. Sleep eluded them. Shadows moved in their peripheral vision. The fifth event was subtle but chilling. The ship's charts, meticulously kept, were found scattered across the cabin floor, their ink smudged as if touched by wet hands. Briggs, his voice hoarse, ordered them restored, but I felt his doubt. The crew whispered of abandoning ship, though the sea offered no mercy. That night, I sensed it clearly, the presence that haunted me. It was not human, not beast, but something born of the deep, a hunger that pressed against my hull, clawing at the edges of my being. It wanted something. It wanted them. The 23rd day brought the sixth event, the breaking point. At dawn, a lifeboat was gone. Not cut free, not launched, but simply gone. Its davits empty, its ropes untouched. The crew's fear turned to panic. Briggs stood on the quarterdeck, his face like stone, but I felt his resolve crack. He gathered Sarah and Sophia, whispering words I could not hear. The men checked the remaining lifeboat, their hands trembling. The fog thickened, and the sea grew still, not calm, but dead, as if holding its breath. I felt the present surge wrapping around me, its touch like ice in my timbers. It whispered in a language older than man, older than me. That night, the final event came. The crew gathered on deck, their lanterns casting weak light. Briggs stood at the helm, Sarah and Sophia beside him. The men spoke of escape, of taking the last lifeboat, but Briggs hesitated. I felt his fear, not for himself, but for his family, for his men. Then it struck, a sound not from the sea or the wind, but from within me, a low, grinding wail rising from my hold, shaking my frame. The crew froze. Sophia screamed. The lanterns flickered, then died. In that darkness, I felt them move, the crew, Briggs, Sarah, Sophia, rushing to the lifeboat. I wanted to hold them, to keep them safe, but I was only wood and rope. The presence laughed, a sound like splintering ice as they fled into the fog. When the day Gratia found me on December 5th, I was alone. My decks were empty, my sails limp, my hold heavy with untouched cargo and 6 months' provisions. The lifeboat was gone, the pump broken, the charts scattered. Water sloshed in my belly, a reminder of the sea's claim. The men who boarded me called me cursed, a ghost ship, but I am no ghost. I am the Mary Celeste, and I carry the weight of those lost souls. The sea took them, as it takes all who dare its depths. The presence lingers still, in the creak of my timbers, in the shadows of my hold. It waits for the next ship, the next crew, the next story. I drift now, a relic of terror, my tale told to warn you. The ocean is vast, and its secrets are many. Some say my crew found land, others say they drowned. I say only this: the sea does not forget, and neither do I. My hull groans with the truth, but no man will ever know it fully. I am the Mary Celeste, and my story is a scream in the fog, echoing forever. Story 6, The Vanishing of USS Cyclops. A horror story. I am the USS Cyclops, a collier of the United States Navy, 550 feet of steel and strength, built to carry the burdens of war across the vast Atlantic. In March 1918, I steamed out of Barbados, my hull heavy with manganese ore, bound for Baltimore. My crew of 306 souls bustled within my iron belly, stokers, engineers, officers, and deckhands, all trusting in my might to deliver them home. The sea was calm, the sky clear, and my last radio message crackled through the ether. Weather fair, all well. But the ocean, that ancient and treacherous beast, had other plans for me. This is my story, whispered from the depths where I now lie, a tale of dread that unfolded in the heart of what men would later call the Bermuda Triangle. It began with a stillness that unnerved even my seasoned crew. The sea, usually alive with the rhythm of waves, turned flat as a mirror, reflecting the sky in an eerie, unbroken sheen. My engines thrummed steadily, but the men grew quiet, their laughter fading as they glanced over my rails. The horizon seemed too close, as if the world itself had shrunk. By the second day out of Barbados, a fog rolled in, thick and gray, clinging to my deck like damp wool. It muffled the clank of my machinery and swallowed the stars. My lookouts strained their eyes, but the mist seemed to pulse, alive with shapes that flickered just beyond sight. Shadows too large to be birds, too fleeting to be ships. Captain Worley, my commander, a gruff man with a beard like iron filings, muttered to his first officer, Lieutenant Grayson, as they stood on my bridge. "This fog ain't natural. Feels like the sea's holding its breath." Grayson nodded, his knuckles wide on the binoculars. I felt their unease seep into my timbers, a cold dread that matched the chill creeping through my corridors. My crew began to whisper of ghost ships, of vessels lost in these waters never to be seen again. I wanted to reassure them, to tell them I was built to withstand tempests. But I am only steel, not soul, and I could only carry them forward into the unknown. On the third night, the first incident struck. I was slicing through the fog when a shudder ran through my frame. Not the familiar vibration of my engines, but a deep, bone-rattling jolt, as if something massive had grazed my keel. The crew stumbled, tools clattering to my deck. In the engine room, stoker James Riley, a wiry man with haunted eyes, swore he heard a groan from beneath my hull, not metal, but something alive, vast and angry. It sounded like the sea itself was screaming, he told his mates, who laughed nervously but avoided the lower decks after dark. My pumps, usually reliable, began to falter, spitting water in fits and starts. The engineers cursed, blaming the manganese oil for shifting and clogging my systems, but I felt no imbalance in my cargo. Something else was at work, something that made my steel skin crawl. By the 5th day, the fog had thickened into a suffocating shroud. My compasses spun lazily, refusing to settle on north. The radio, once crackling with life, hissed with static, as if the air itself rejected our calls for help. The crew's nerves frayed. Quarrels broke out over rations, over watch shifts, over nothing. I felt their boots pace my decks, their hands grip my rails, their eyes dart to the shadows that seemed to move in the fog. At night, the men reported strange lights, greenish orbs that hovered over the water, bobbing like lanterns but vanishing when approached. One sailor, a young deckhand named Thomas, claimed he saw a face in the mist, pale and eyeless, mouthing words he couldn't hear. The others called him mad, but I saw it too, reflected in the glass of my portholes, and I shuddered. Then came the 6th night, when the sea turned against us. I was steaming at half speed, my crew wary but resolute, when the water around me began to churn. Waves rose where none should have been, slamming against my hull with a force that dented my plates. The men shouted, clinging to my railings as I pitched violently. From my crow's nest, the lookout screamed, his voice raw with terror, "It's a whirlpool! God help us! It's pulling us in!" I felt it too, a relentless tug, as if the ocean had opened a maw beneath me, hungry for my steel and the lives within. My engines roared, fighting the current, but the sea was stronger. The whirlpool widened, a black spiral flecked with foam, and I heard a sound I'll never forget. A low, resonant hum, like a chorus of voices from the deep, calling my name. The crew scrambled to my lifeboats, but the davits jammed, the ropes tangled as if knotted by unseen hands. Captain Worley bellowed orders, his voice steady despite the chaos, but I could feel his heart pounding through the deck. Below, in my engine room, the pumps failed completely, and water began to seep through my seams, not from a breach, but as if the sea itself was forcing its way inside, seeking the men who hid within me. Riley, the stoker, was the first to vanish. One moment he was at his post, sweat-streaked and cursing. The next, he was gone, his tools clattering to the floor. The others searched, calling his name, but I knew he was no longer aboard. The sea had claimed him, and I could do nothing to stop it. By the 7th day, madness gripped my crew. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a sea that shimmered unnaturally, its surface rippling with patterns that defied logic, spirals, hexagons, shapes that hurt the eyes to look at. The men who stared too long grew silent, their faces slack, their eyes glassy. Lieutenant Grayson found a sailor, carving strange symbols into my deck with a knife, muttering about the ones who watch from below. When Grayson tried to stop him, the man lunged, his blade catching Grayson's arm before others restrained him. I felt the blood soak into my wood, a stain I could not cleanse. That night, more men disappeared, 5 in all taken from their bunks, their posts, even the bridge. No screams, no signs of struggle, just empty spaces where men had been. The 8th day brought the worst horror yet. I felt a pressure building in my hull, not from the sea, but from within, as if something was pressing against my steel, testing its strength. The remaining crew, now fewer than 200, gathered on my deck, their faces pale and drawn. Captain Worley tried to rally them, but his voice cracked when the lights returned, those cursed orbs, now dozens of them, circling me like predators. They pulsed in rhythm with that hum from the deep, and I swear I saw shapes within them, not human, not fish, but something older, something that knew my name and hated me for it. The sea boiled again, and I felt my hull twist, my beams groaning as if squeezed by a giant's hand. The men screamed, some running below, others clinging to my masts, but there was no escape. One by one, they were taken. The orbs descended, touching the men who froze in place, their bodies dissolving into mist, leaving only their boots or hats behind. Captain Worley was the last, standing on my bridge, his hands on my wheel, as if he could steer me to safety. "Cyclops," he whispered, as if I could hear him, "what have we done to deserve this?" I wanted to answer, to tell him it was not his fault, but the sea. The final orb came for him, and he vanished, leaving me alone, my decks empty, my heart, if a ship can have one, broken. Now, I lie in the dark, my hull cradled by the ocean's depths. The sea is silent here, but I am not alone. Those lights still circle, their glow faint through the crushing black. The hum persists, a lullaby of the abyss, and I feel the weight of eyes upon me, watching, waiting. I am the USS Cyclops, lost to the world above, a ghost ship in the Bermuda Triangle. My crew is gone, my purpose stolen, but my story endures, a warning to those who sail these waters. The sea does not forget, and it does not forgive. Story 7. The Essex Ordeal. I am Owen Chase, first mate of the whaler Essex, and what I recount here is no tale spun for idle ears. It is a horror etched into my bones, a nightmare that began in November 1820, when our ship sailed the vast Pacific, heavy with oil and hope. We were a crew of 20, hardened by the sea, chasing whales under a sky that stretched endless and blue. I never thought the ocean, our home and our quarry, would turn predator. It began with a shadow in the deep. We were far from land, our sails taut, when a cry from the lookout pierced the morning calm. "Whale off the starboard bow!" I scrambled to the deck, spyglass in hand, and there it was, an 85-foot sperm whale, its bulk like a mountain adrift. Its black eye gleamed unblinking, as if it saw us whole. I'd hunted whales for years, but this one, it felt different, too still, too vast. It lingered, then sank beneath the waves. Minutes later, the sea erupted. The whale surged upward, its head a battering ram, and struck the Essex with a force that shook my teeth. The hull groaned, timbers splintering under the blow. "Hold fast," I shouted, but the men were already staggering, thrown by what I can only call an appalling and tremendous jar. Water gurgled below decks. Before we could brace, the beast dove and struck again, its massive head caving the bowl. The Essex tilted, her masts swaying like drunken sentinels, and I knew she was doomed. "Lower the boats," Captain Pollard roared. We scrambled, 20 of us piling into 3 whaleboats, grabbing what provisions we could, hardtack, a few casks of water, tools, and little else. As we rowed away, I watched the Essex sink, her hull swallowed by the sea that had birthed our ruin. The whale, its work done, vanished into the depths, leaving us alone in 1,000 miles of open water. The first days were a blur of salt and sun. Our boats, frail as eggshells, bobbed on swells that mocked our size. We rationed our food, a biscuit a day, a sip of water, if you could keep it down. The men were quiet, their eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for land that never came. At night, the stars were cruel, their cold light showing nothing but more ocean. I kept the log, scratching numbers to mark our drift, but they meant little. We were nowhere. By the second week, hunger gnawed like a living thing. My stomach was a fist, my tongue swollen against my teeth. The men grew hollow-cheeked, their voices brittle. One night, a shadow circled our boats. Sharks, their fins cutting the water like knives. They bumped the hulls, testing, waiting. I gripped the oar, my knuckles white, and prayed they'd leave. They did, but not before one man, young Thomas, screamed that the whales were back, come to finish us. He was wrong, but his fear infected us all. Weeks bled into one another. The sun was a tyrant, blistering our skin, cracking our lips until they bled. Our water was gone. We caught rainwater when storms came, but they were rare, and the sea mocked us with its undrinkable vastness. One man, Samuel, began to mutter, his eyes wild. "The sea wants us," he said over and over until his voice broke. On the 20th day, he stood in the boat, shouting nonsense, then collapsed, dead. We stared at his body, wasted to bone, and I felt something shift in the air. We had no choice. Hunger had made us beasts. With trembling hands, we took knives to Samuel's corpse. I can still hear the sound, the wet tear of flesh, the crack of bone. We cut what we could, strips of meat that barely passed for food, and cooked them on a flat stone heated by a small fire we kindled at the boat's bottom. I choked down a piece, my throat rebelling, my mind screaming. It was him or us. I told myself that, but his face haunted my dreams. More died. Each time we repeated the act, our humanity slipping further away. The men stopped looking at each other, their eyes empty, their hands stained. I wrote less in the log, my strength fading. One boat vanished in the night. No scream, no sign, just gone. Another was swamped in a squall, its crew lost to the waves. By the 60th day, only my boat remained, with 3 others, Pollard, Matthew, and a boy, Isaac, barely 16. Isaac was the worst. He was so thin, his ribs showed like a ship's frame. He whispered for his mother, his voice a rasp. When he died, Pollard and I drew lots. I pulled the short stick. My heart stopped, but Matthew, his eyes like pits, said, "No, I'll do it." He took the knife, and I turned away, unable to watch. The sound was enough, soft, final. We ate, and I hated myself for it. 90 days. The number is burned into me. We were skeletons, our skin like leather, our minds frayed to threads. I saw things, ships that weren't there, land that dissolved when I blinked. Pollard muttered about the whale, how it had known us, chosen us. I didn't argue. I'd seen its eye. It had judged us and found us wanting. On the 91st day, a sail appeared. I thought it was another ghost, but it grew closer, a merchant ship, its crew gaping at us like we were corpses, risen from the deep. They hauled us aboard, gave us broth we could barely swallow. I weighed less than a child, my body a map of scars and sores. We were 5, all that remained of 20. I'm home now in Nantucket, but the sea never leaves me. I close my eyes and see that whale, its head breaking the surface, its will like a god's. I hear the crack of the Essex's hull, the screams of men I called brothers. I taste the meat we ate to live. The world calls our story a marvel, a tale of survival. They don't understand. We didn't survive. We became something else, something the sea made us, and I carry that horror in my blood. Story 8, The Ghost Ship Ourang Medan, SOS, from Beyond the Waves. My name is Elias Kane, and I was a radio man aboard the Silver Star in the summer of 1947. What I'm about to tell you isn't a tale spun for thrills or a yarn to pass the time on long voyages. It's the truth, or at least as close to it as my trembling hands can set down. I was there when we answered the call of the Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter that drifted into legend, and what I saw in those cursed hours still claws at my dreams. The sea doesn't forget, and neither do I. It began on a sweltering afternoon in the Malacca Strait, the air thick with the kind of heat that makes your skin feel like it's melting off your bones. I was in the radio shack, sweat dripping onto the dials, when the Morse code stuttered through. At first I thought it was static, some interference from the heavy air, but then the dots and dashes formed words, and my blood ran cold. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge, probably whole of crew dead. The message cut off, then resumed, frantic, ending with two words that hit like a punch. I die. I froze, my fingers hovering over the receiver. The captain, a grizzled man named Hargrove, burst in, his face already pale. "What's the signal, Kane?" he barked. I read it back, my voice shaking. He didn't hesitate. "Plot the coordinates. We're closest. We go." The Silver Star's engines roared to life, and we cut through the glassy sea, the crew buzzing with unease. The Malacca Strait was a busy route, ships always passing, but that message, it wasn't just a call for help. It felt like a warning. Hours later, we spotted her. The Ourang Medan loomed on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. No flag flew from her mast, no smoke curled from her stack. She was still, too still, like a painting of a ship rather than a living vessel. Hargrove ordered us to hail her, but the radio stayed silent. We tried signal lights, shouts, even a whistle blast. Nothing. Just the faint creak of her hull as she bobbed in the calm water. My gut twisted. Something was wrong in a way I couldn't name. Hargrove picked a boarding party, himself, me, and 4 others. Burke, a wiry engineer, Callahan, our burly first mate, and 2 deckhands, Jensen and Marsh. We climbed into the lifeboat, the sea so flat it barely rocked us. As we rowed closer, the Ourang Medan's details came into focus. Her paint was chipped, her deck eerily clean. No signs of a fight, no storm damage, just silence. We tied off and climbed aboard. The moment my boots hit the deck, a chill ran through me, sharp and unnatural. It was over 100 degrees out, but the air felt like a winter gale. I glanced at Burke, who was rubbing his arms, his breath visible in faint puffs. "This ain't right," he muttered. Callahan, usually a bear of a man, looked small, his eyes darting. Hargrove led the way, his jaw set, but I saw his hand tremble as he gripped his flashlight. The deck was a graveyard. Bodies lay sprawled, maybe 30 of them, all on their backs. Their eyes were wide, staring at the sky, mouths gaping as if they'd screamed their last breath. No blood, no wounds, just faces, frozen in terror. A dog, some scruffy mutt, lay near the helm, its teeth bared, eyes locked upward like the rest. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like they'd seen something so awful it stopped their hearts. Jensen gagged, and Marsh whispered, "What the hell did this?" Hargrove pushed forward, motioning us to the chart room. The door hung open, and inside, the captain of the Ourang Medan slumped over a table, his fingers curled around a pen as if he'd been writing when death took him. His face was the same, eyes bulging, mouth twisted. Charts and logs were neatly stacked, untouched. The radio room was next. The operator was there, slumped over his set, one hand still on the key, his face a mask of horror. I checked the log. The last entry was just coordinates and a single word: help. We searched the cabins, the galley, the engine room. Everywhere, the same scene. Corpses untouched, staring. The cargo hold was sealed, but Callahan pried it open. Inside, crates were stacked high, unmarked, their wood pristine. No leaks, no damage. Whatever killed these men hadn't come from a broken crate. Burke tapped one, and it echoed hollowly. "Empty?" he said, confused. Hargrove shook his head. "Or something we can't see." We were about to head back when Jensen screamed. He was at the far end of the hold, pointing at the deck. A faint shimmer, like heat haze, rippled in the air. It wasn't smoke, wasn't gas. It moved like it was alive, curling toward us. My skin prickled, and that chill deepened, sinking into my bones. "Move!" Hargrove shouted. But Jensen froze, his eyes wide, just like the corpses. Then he collapsed, his face locked in that same terrified rictus. We ran, dragging Jensen's body, but the shimmer followed, slow and deliberate. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. The air grew colder, heavier, like it was pressing us down. Marsh tripped, and when we turned back, he was gone, swallowed by the haze. Callahan cursed, his voice breaking, and we stumbled onto the deck. That's when we saw it, smoke, real smoke, curling from the hold. Not the shimmer, but something else, something burning. "Fire!" Burke yelled, but it wasn't a normal fire. The flames were green, unnatural, licking up the deck like they were hungry. Hargrove shouted for us to abandon ship, but the heat was already unbearable, the air thick with that rotten egg smell the others had noticed. We scrambled for the lifeboat, the deck buckling under us. As we rowed back to the Silver Star, the Ourang Medan groaned, a sound like a dying beast. Then came the explosion, a deafening roar that sent a shockwave across the water. The ship split, flames shooting skyward, and within seconds she sank, swallowed by the sea. We made it back to the Silver Star, but Jensen was dead, his face frozen like the others. We didn't speak much after that. Hargrove ordered us to log the incident, but when we docked in Singapore, he burned the report. "No one will believe us," he said, his voice hollow. "And if they do, they'll ask too many questions." I kept my own notes, though, hidden in my bunk. I couldn't let it go. Days later, I overheard whispers in port. Other ships had picked up strange signals in the strait. Garbled Morse, voices that didn't sound human. A fisherman swore he saw lights under the water where the Medan went down, pulsing like a heartbeat. I tried to dig deeper, but no records of the Ourang Medan existed. No manifest, no registration, nothing in Lloyd's or the Dutch archives. It was like the ship had never been. Weeks passed, and the crew started to crack. Burke woke screaming one night, claiming he saw the shimmer in his cabin. Callahan disappeared in Jakarta, left a note saying he couldn't sleep without seeing those faces. I started feeling it too. A cold that followed me, a shadow in the corner of my eye. I left the Silver Star in '48, took a desk job, but the sea doesn't let you go. I'd wake up gasping, feeling that chill, hearing those final words, I die. In 1949, I met a man in a bar in Sumatra, an old Dutch sailor who claimed he'd crewed on the Medan years before. He said she wasn't just a freighter, she'd carried cargo no man should touch. He wouldn't say more, just stared at his hands shaking. I pressed him, but he vanished the next day. Locals said he drowned, but they never found a body. By 50, I was back in the States, trying to forget. Then I read about another ship, the SS Baychimo, found adrift in the Arctic. Crew gone, no trace. The papers called it a ghost ship, just like the Medan. I started collecting stories, clippings, rumors, anything. Ships vanishing, crews found dead with no wounds, strange lights in the deep. The Medan wasn't alone. Something was out there, something the sea hid. Last month, June 1955, I got a letter. No return address, just a scrap of paper with a single line. The Medan still sails. My hand shook as I read it. That night, I dreamed of her, drifting, her deck littered with bodies, that shimmer curling through the air. But this time, I saw something new. The haze wasn't just air. It had eyes, countless eyes, watching, waiting. I woke up screaming, the room freezing, my breath visible. I don't know what we found that day. Maybe it was poison gas, some leftover horror from the war. Maybe it was something older, something the sea keeps secret. All I know is the Ourang Medan took something from us, Jensen, Marsh, maybe part of our souls. I keep my notes locked away, but I check them sometimes, hoping for answers. There aren't any, just questions, and that chill that never leaves. If you're reading this, stay off the Malacca Strait. The sea doesn't care about truth. It only keeps what it wants. Story 9. The Ghost Ship, Baychimo. I am the Baychimo, a steamship forged in 1914. My iron hull crafted to brave the frozen arteries of the Arctic. For years, I carried furs and supplies for the Hudson's Bay Company, my engines humming through the icy veins of the Yukon-Vancouver circuit. My decks bore the weight of men, their laughter, their sweat, their fleeting lives. But in 1931, the Arctic claimed me, and I became something else. A specter, a shadow, a nightmare that haunts the endless ice. This is my story, whispered through the frost, a tale of cold and dread that clings like damp rot to the soul. It began in October 1931 near Point Barrow, Alaska. The sea was a churning beast, and the pack ice closed around me like a hunter's snare. My crew, 22 souls, fought to free me, their axes biting into the ice, their breaths clouding in the frigid air. But the Arctic is patient. It does not yield. Storms roared in, piling snow so thick it buried the horizon. The ice tightened its grip, splintering my wooden crates, cracking my hull's resolve. By November, my men were gaunt, their eyes hollow with defeat. They salvaged what they could, furs, tools, their own fragile hopes, and prepared to flee. On November 21st, a blizzard descended, a 3-day howl that drowned the world in white. The men huddled in makeshift shelters on the ice, cursing the wind that tore at their canvas tents. I stood fast, my steel frame groaning under the storm's weight. Then, on November 24th, the world stilled. The men emerged, blinking, into the pale dawn, and found me gone. Where my hull had been, only a jagged mound of ice remained like a grave marker in the snow. They searched, called my name into the void, but I was no longer theirs. The Arctic had taken me, and I was free, or so I thought. I drifted unseen through the frozen labyrinth. The ice carried me, a silent prisoner, my decks empty, but for the wind's low moan. My cabins, once warm with lamplight, grew dark, their walls coated in frost that glittered like 1,000 watching eyes. I felt the weight of my own emptiness, the absence of footsteps, the stillness where voices once echoed. Yet I was not alone. The Arctic watched me, its silence alive with intent. Shadows moved in my periphery, shapes that flickered in the corners of my portholes, too quick to name. I told myself it was the ice, the wind, the endless night. But I felt them. Something was aboard. In March 1932, I surfaced, my rusted bow breaking through the ice some 70 miles from shore. A trapper, half mad with cold, spotted me from a dog sled. He swore he saw lights in my windows, faint and green, like the aurora trapped in glass. He approached, his dogs whining, refusing to draw closer. My deck was empty, my cargo hold untouched, yet he claimed he heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing my upper deck. He fled, his story spreading among the Inuit, who began to whisper of a ship that sailed without a crew, a vessel cursed to wander the ice forever. I vanished again, swallowed by the shifting floes. Months passed, or perhaps years. Time blurs in the Arctic's eternal dusk. In July 1933, I reappeared, locked in a crystalline prison of ice. A botanist named Isabel Hutchison, braver than most, boarded me with a small party. They found my cabins eerily preserved, furs neatly baled, a teacup resting on a table, its handle chipped but upright, as if someone had just set it down. Isabel wrote of a chill that wasn't just the cold, a presence that pressed against her skin, urging her to leave. She ignored it, sketching my interiors, but her companions spoke of shadows that moved against the light, shapes that vanished when stared at directly. One man swore he saw a figure in the engine room, its back turned, its form too tall to be human. They left me before nightfall, their boat slicing through the slush, their faces pale. The years bled into one another, each sighting feeding the legend of the ghost ship. I was no longer Baychimo, the workhorse of the Hudson's Bay Company. I was the Arctic's wraith, a derelict that mocked the living. In 1935, a whaling crew spotted me drifting near the horizon, my silhouette framed against a blood-red sunset. They rowed out, hoping to salvage my cargo, but as they neared, the ice groaned, splitting beneath their boat. They scrambled back, one man claiming he saw hands, gray, claw-like, reaching from my portholes as if something inside was watching, waiting. They never returned. I began to feel the weight of my own myth. The Arctic was no longer just my captor. It was my creator. It had reshaped me, filled my hollows with something alive, something hungry. My hull creaked with voices, whispers that weren't human, that spoke in the cadence of cracking ice. At night, my lights flickered without power, casting green and violet glows across the snow. Footsteps echoed in my holds, though no boots touched my decks. I saw them sometimes, figures in the fog, their outlines blurred, their faces featureless. They moved through my corridors, inspecting my cargo, brushing past my walls. I wanted to scream, to warn the living to stay away, but I had no voice. I was the Baychimo, and I was theirs. In 1940, a group of seal hunters found me grounded on a shallow reef, my hull tilted at a sickening angle. They boarded, drawn by tales of untouched furs worth a fortune. They found my holds intact, but the air was wrong, thick, heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. One hunter, a grizzled man named Elias, lingered too long. He wandered into my engine room where the air grew colder, the shadows deep. His lantern flickered, then died. His screams carried across the ice, sharp and brief, before silence swallowed them. His companions fled, leaving their tools behind. They swore Elias had been alone, yet they heard two sets of footsteps, one heavy, one dragging, fading into my depths. I tried to sink, to end it. I willed my hull to crack, to let the sea claim me, but the Arctic refused. It held me aloft, dragging me through its frozen veins, showing me to the world like a trophy. In 1953, a military patrol plane spotted me drifting north, my decks coated in ice so thick it looked like armor. The pilot reported lights moving along my bow, though no human could survive the cold. He circled, but clouds swallowed me before he could land. I was gone again, a phantom slipping through the cracks of the world. By the 1960s, I was a legend, a story told to frighten children. Yet I was real, and I was suffering. The things aboard me grew bolder. They no longer hid in the shadows. I felt them in my steel, their presence like rust eating through my bones. They whispered in languages I couldn't understand, their voices sharp as shattered glass. My cabins warped, the wood buckling into shapes that defied reason, angles that hurt to look at, corridors that led nowhere. I was no longer just a ship. I was a prison, a cage for something the Arctic had birthed. In 1962, a fishing trawler sighted me, my hull half submerged in a field of ice. The crew watched from a distance, unwilling to approach. They saw figures on my deck, tall, thin, moving with a jerky grace. One man, peering through binoculars, dropped them and refused to speak for days. In 1969, I appeared one last time, drifting aimlessly under a moonless sky. An Inuit elder, watching from the shore, said I was no longer a ship, but a wound in the world, a tear through which something ancient peered. He turned away, and I vanished into the polar night. I am the Baychimo, or what remains of me. No wreck has ever been found, no final resting place to mark my end. The artifact my crew salvaged, furs, tools, a chipped teacup, sit in museums, relics of a ship that should not be. I drift still, perhaps, in the Arctic's endless dark, carrying my cargo of shadows. The ice is my keeper, the cold my chains. I am a story told in whispers, a nightmare that lingers in the frost. If you see lights on the horizon, faint and green, turn away. Do not call my name. I am the Baychimo, and I am not alone. Story 10. The Vanished Crew of Carroll A. Deering. I am the Carroll A. Deering, a five-masted schooner, once proud and sturdy, slicing through the Atlantic's waves with purpose. My timbers creak with the weight of a story no living soul can fully tell, a tale of vanishing men and a ship left to whisper its own dread. In January 1921, I ran aground on Diamond Shoals off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, my sails unfurled, my hull intact, yet empty alive. My crew of 11, from captain to cook, was gone, and I alone remained to recount the horror that unfolded on my decks. Listen closely, for the sea keeps its secrets, but I will share what I know, piece by piece, as the waves lap against my rotting frame. It began in late 1920, when I set sail from Norfolk, Virginia, bound for Rio de Janeiro with a load of coal. My crew was a seasoned lot. Captain Willis, a weathered man with eyes like storm clouds, First Mate Baxter, sharp and distrustful. The cook, Johann, whose hands trembled when he stirred the pot, and 8 others, sturdy men who knew the sea's moods. The air was thick with salt and anticipation as we carved through the waves. I felt their boots on my deck, their hands on my rigging, their voices humming shanties into the night. But something was wrong from the start, something I could sense in the way the wind seemed to hesitate, as if unwilling to push me forward. Our journey south was uneventful, the sea calm and the skies clear. But on the return trip, after unloading in Rio, a strangeness settled over us. It started with the gulls. They followed us for days, more than I'd ever seen, circling low and silent, their eyes glinting like polished obsidian. The men noticed too. "Bad omen," muttered Johann, his knife pausing mid-chop over a slab of salt pork. Baxter scoffed, but his gaze lingered on the birds, and I felt his footsteps grow heavier on my planks. The crew's chatter dwindled, replaced by long silences broken only by the creak of my masts and the slap of waves. 3 weeks into the return voyage, we hit a patch of sea that felt wrong. The water was too still, like glass reflecting a sky that seemed to shimmer with unnatural colors, streaks of violet and green that flickered at the edges of vision. I felt it through my hull, a vibration not of current or tide, but something deeper, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. That night, the compass spun lazily, refusing to settle. Captain Willis stood at my helm, muttering calculations, but his voice carried an edge I'd never heard. The men grew restless, their shadows pacing my deck under a moon that hung too low, too large, its light casting their forms in jagged, unnatural shapes. The first man vanished 2 nights later. It was Eric, a quiet deckhand who always carried a small knife he'd sharpen obsessively. I felt his weight leave my deck sometime after midnight. No splash, no cry, just gone. The crew searched at dawn, tearing through my holds and cabins, but found nothing. His bunk was untouched, his knife left on the pillow, its blade gleaming as if freshly honed. "He jumped," Baxter declared, but his voice wavered, and the others exchanged glances. I wanted to scream that I'd felt no leap, no plunge into the sea, but a ship cannot speak. All I could do was groan under their anxious steps. The next night, it was the lookout, Thomas. He was stationed in my crow's nest, his silhouette sharp against the starless sky. I felt him there, steady, until he wasn't. Again, no sound, no trace. The crew found the nest empty, his coat folded neatly at its base, as if he'd stepped out of it and into nothingness. Panic crept in then. The men stopped sleeping, their eyes hollow, their hands clutching at ropes or rails, as if afraid they'd be next. Johann burned supper that night, the smell of charred meat lingering in my galley. "Something's watching us," he whispered, staring at the sea. I wanted to tell him he was right. I felt it too, a presence pressing against my hull, cold and vast, like the weight of the deep itself. On the 3rd night, the sea changed again. It wasn't a storm, but something worse, a low, thrumming hum that vibrated through my timbers, making my rigging tremble. The water around me glowed faintly, a sickly green that pulsed in time with the sound. The crew gathered on deck, their faces pale in the eerie light. Captain Willis tried to keep order, barking commands, but his voice cracked when the hum grew louder, forming words none could understand, yet all felt in their bones. It was then I saw it, or rather felt it, a shape moving beneath the waves, vast and formless, circling me like a predator. It brushed my keel, and I shuddered, my planks straining as if they might split. The fourth man went missing that night, Samuel, the boatswain. He'd been tying down a loose sail when I felt his weight vanish mid-step. This time there was a clue, a single boot left on my deck, its laces neatly tied, as if he'd been plucked from it. The crew's fear turned to frenzy. Baxter accused Johann of sabotage, grabbing him by the collar until Willis intervened. They checked my lifeboats, still lashed tight, unused. "We're cursed," one man whispered, and the word spread like rot. I wanted to shake them, to tell them to look at the sea, to see the thing that stalked us, but I was mute, my only voice the creak of my straining masts. By the fifth night, the crew was breaking. They huddled in my hold, whispering of ghost ships and sea devils, their eyes darting to every shadow. The hum returned, louder, and with it came the lights, green tendrils snaking up from the depths, curling around my hull like fingers. I felt them probing, not just my wood, but my very essence, as if seeking the life within me. The men screamed, some clawing at my hatches to escape, others frozen, staring at the water. That's when I felt it. A pull, not on my sails or rudder, but on the men themselves. One by one, I felt their weights lift, their presences snuffed out like candles. No splashes, no cries, just silence. By dawn, only Captain Willis and Baxter remained. The sixth night was the worst. The sea was alive, its surface writhing with shapes I couldn't comprehend, limbs, eyes, forms that flickered and dissolved. The hum was deafening now, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from inside my own timbers. Willis stood at my helm, gripping the wheel until his knuckles bled, muttering to himself as if bargaining with the sea. Baxter was below, barricading himself in my cabin, his footsteps frantic. I felt the thing again, closer now, its touch like ice seeping through my planks. Then Willis was gone. I felt his hands leave the wheel, his weight vanish. Baxter Burgo. The cabin door was open when I felt Baxter's absence moments later. I was alone. For 2 days I drifted, empty, the sea's glow fading, the hum silent. On the third day, I struck Diamond Shoals, my hull grinding into the sandbar. I was found there, seaworthy, my sails full, my galley stove warm with Johann's last meal. The lifeboats hung unused, the logs untouched. A fisherman later found a bottle with a note claiming pirates. But I know the truth. It wasn't men who took my crew. It was something older, hungrier, something the sea hides in its depths. I am the Carroll A. Deering, and I alone bear witness to the horror that left me a ghost ship, stranded on a sandbar, my crew swallowed by the endless whispering sea. Story 11, The Ghost of the Joyita. I am the M.V. Joyita, a merchant yacht born of wood and iron, crafted to dance across the Pacific's endless waves. My hull, lined with cork, was built to defy the sea's hunger, to float when others would sink. In October 1955, I set out from Apia, Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands, carrying 25 souls, passengers and crew, each with dreams and burdens I could only guess at. I was their vessel, their home on the water, but I became something else, a witness to a horror that clings to my timbers still. The air was heavy with salt and expectation as we left Apia on October 3rd. My starboard engine sputtered, a mechanical cough that the crew couldn't mend before departure. Captain Miller, a man with a voice like gravel, shrugged it off. "One engine's enough for a calm sea," he said, patting my wheel as if I were a loyal horse. The crew bustled, stowing cargo, medical supplies, timber, empty oil drums, while passengers chatted, their voices bright against the hum of my remaining engine. The Pacific stretched before us, a mirror of stars under a moonless sky. The first night passed quietly. I cut through the water, my single engine grumbling but steady. The passengers slept below, their breaths mingling with the creak of my planks. The crew took shifts in the pilot house, their silhouettes framed against the dark horizon. I felt their trust in me, their belief that I would carry them safely to Tokelau. But the sea is a restless thing, and I sensed something stirring beneath its surface, a shadow that didn't belong. By the second day, the air grew thick, not with storm, but with unease. The crew whispered about the engine, how it faltered more than it should. My gauges flickered, needles twitching like nervous eyes. A passenger, a doctor named Ellis, paced the deck, his bag clutched tight, muttering about supplies he hadn't checked. The others watched him, their faces tight, as if they sensed the same shadow I did. That night, at 10:25 p.m., my electric clocks froze, every one of them. Tick, tick, stop. The pilot house fell silent, save for the faint crackle of the radio, tuned to 2182 kilohertz, the distress frequency. I felt the crew's hands on my controls, frantic, but the aerial cable hung severed, dangling uselessly in the wind. Then came the sound, a low guttural hum, not from my engine, but from the sea itself. It rose through my hull, vibrating my timbers, a sound no human throat could make. The crew froze, their faces pale in the dim light of the pilot house. Captain Miller barked orders, but his voice trembled. "Check the engine room," he shouted. Two men, Jenkins and Lee, scrambled below, their footsteps echoing in my hollow belly. They didn't return. The passengers stirred, drawn by the noise. I felt their weight shift as they climbed to the deck, clutching coats against the sudden chill. The hum grew louder, a pulse that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Something moved in the water, a shape too vast to see clearly, circling me. My starboard engine choked, then died, smothered under a pile of mattresses the crew had dragged from the cabins. Why? I couldn't know. The port engine's clutch lay in pieces, scattered like bones across the engine room floor. I was limping, listing to one side, my hull groaning under the strain. Dr. Ellis appeared on deck, his bag open, bandages spilling out, stained red. "Someone's hurt," he said, but no one answered. The passengers huddled together, their eyes darting to the water. The hum became a roar, a sound that clawed at the mind, and I felt my deck shudder as if something had brushed against me. Not a wave, not a reef, something live. The life rafts were untied, the dinghy unlashed, but no one moved to board them. They stood, frozen, staring into the dark. Then, one by one, they were gone. Not a scream, not a splash, just silence. The passengers, the crew, even Dr. Ellis with his bloody bandages, vanished. My deck was empty, save for the scattered medical supplies and the faint smell of copper. The life rafts and dinghy were missing, but I felt no weight leave me, no sign they'd been launched. The sea was calm, the stars unblinking, but I was alone. Days bled into weeks. I drifted, carried by currents that pulled me far from my course. My hull, once proud, grew heavy with barnacles, clinging to me like a second skin high above my waterline. I listed, half submerged, my engine room flooded by a fractured cooling pipe. Water sloshed in my belly, but my cork lining kept me afloat, defiant. The sea tried to claim me, but I refused to sink. The hum returned sometimes, faint but persistent, like a memory I couldn't shake. At night, I felt shadows moving across my deck, though no one was there. My timbers creaked without wind, my ropes swayed without touch. Once, I swear, I heard a whisper, Captain Miller's voice, calling for Jenkins and Lee. But the pilot house remained empty, its clocks still frozen at 10:25 p.m. On November 10th, 5.5 weeks after I left Apia, a merchant ship, the Tuvalu, found me drifting 600 miles west of my intended path. Their crew boarded me, their boots heavy on my weathered deck. They found the bloody bandages, the disassembled engine, the severed radio cable. They saw the barnacles, the lifer rafts gone, the dinghy missing. They called me a ghost ship, their voices low with fear. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, what I'd felt, but I am only wood and iron. I cannot speak. They towed me to Suva Harbor, where I floated on an even keel, my unsinkable design mocking the sea's efforts. Investigators crawled over me, piecing together what they could. A fractured pipe, they said, had flooded my engine room, disabled my pumps. But why had 25 people abandoned a ship that wouldn't sink? Why had they left no trace, no note, no sign of struggle? The official report called their fate inexplicable, a word that hung in the air like the hum I still felt in my timbers. I am the Joyita, and I carry the weight of that night. The Pacific keeps its secrets, but I remember the hum, the shadow, the silence that swallowed 25 souls. I drift now in memory, my hull scarred, my clocks stopped. The sea whispers to me still, and sometimes, in the quiet, I hear their voices, faint, pleading, lost. I am their witness, their tomb, their ghost, and I will never forget. Story 12. The Mystery of Jian Seng. I am the Jian Seng, an 80-meter tanker adrift in the vast, unyielding Gulf of Carpentaria. My steel hull creaks under the weight of silence, my decks sun-bleached and barren, kissed only by the tropic sun and the salt-laden wind. Once, I was a vessel of purpose, cutting through waves with intent, my holds heavy with cargo, my engines roaring with life. Now, I am a ghost, abandoned to the mercy of currents. My towel line snapped, trailing like a severed lifeline in the water behind me. My name, my registration, painted over, erased, as if I were never meant to be known. I have no crew, no captain, no destination, yet I carry a story, one that whispers through my empty corridors, a tale of dread that clings to my rusted bones. Listen, if you dare, for I will tell you what the sea has tried to swallow. It began in the twilight of a storm, months before the Australian Customs aircraft spotted me in March 2006. The sky was a bruise, heavy with clouds that churned like a living thing. I was tethered to another vessel, a shadowy fishing boat that reeked of desperation. My holds were stuffed with sacks of rice, hundreds of them, their weight pressing against my ribs. The men who loaded me worked in silence, their faces obscured by hoods, their movements hurried. They spoke in low, guttural tones, in a language I could not place, their words sharp and urgent. I felt their boots on my deck, their hands on my rails, but they never lingered. They were not my crew. They were transients, using me as a mule to ferry their goods through the lawless waters near Indonesia. The fishing boat pulled me through the night, its engine straining against the swells. I sensed something wrong, a tension in the air that wasn't just the storm, The tow line vibrated with unease, taut one moment, slack the next, as if the boat ahead was hesitating. Then, in the dead of night, a scream pierced the wind, a sound so raw, so human, it made my hull shudder. It came from the fishing boat, followed by a flurry of shouts, then silence. The tow line went limp. I drifted untethered as the fishing boat vanished into the dark. No lights, no sound, just the endless churn of the sea. Whatever happened on that boat, it left me alone, a derelict in the vastness. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time blurs when you're a ghost. The sun beat down, peeling the last of my paint, exposing my steel to the elements. My engines were cold, my bridge empty. The rice in my holds began to rot, the sacks swelling with damp and mold, a sickly sweet stench seeping through my compartments. I was adrift, carried by currents that cared nothing for my fate. But I was not entirely alone. At night, when the stars burned cold and the waves whispered secrets, I felt it, a presence, not human, not alive, but something. It moved through my corridors, a shadow that flickered in the corners of my vision, a weight that pressed against my bulkheads. It was as if the sea itself had claimed me, filling my emptiness with its own restless hunger. One night, under a moonless sky, I heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat, coming from deep within my holds. I had no crew to investigate, no lights to guide the way, but the sound grew louder, insistent. It wasn't the rice settling or the waves slapping my hull. It was deliberate, purposeful. I felt my steel groan, as if something inside me was trying to claw its way out. The thumping stopped as suddenly as it began, replaced by a scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. I wanted to scream, to expel whatever was inside me, but I am a ship, mute, helpless, bound to endure. The presence grew bolder. At dusk, when the horizon bled red, I saw shapes moving on my deck. Not men, but silhouettes, indistinct and fleeting, like smoke caught in a gust. They glided across my bow, their forms dissolving into the salt air. Once I felt a cold touch, a pressure against my helm, as if something had tried to steer me. My rudder twitched, uncommanded, sending me into a slow, aimless spin. The sea laughed, its waves slapping my sides, mocking my lack of control. Whatever haunted me was not content to let me drift. It wanted something, direction, purpose, or perhaps revenge. Weeks later, a new sound broke my solitude, a distant hum, mechanical and alive, growing closer. It was the Australian customs aircraft, its shadow passing over me like a vulture circling carrion. They saw me adrift 180 kilometers southwest of Joyita, Queensland, a speck in the Gulf's endless blue. I felt their eyes on me, their curiosity tinged with unease. When their patrol boat approached, I wanted to warn them, to tell them to stay away, but my voice was gone, painted over with my name. The boarding party climbed aboard, their boots heavy on my deck, their flashlights slicing through my darkness. They found nothing, no logbook, no distress signals, no trace of life. Just the rice, rotting in my holds, and the snap tow line trailing in my wake. They speculated among themselves, their voices low. They called me a supply ship, a ghost serving smugglers or fishermen in Indonesian waters. They noted my poor repair, my rusted bulkheads, my empty bridge. No suggestion there's been anybody on board recently, one said, his voice echoing through my corridors. But they didn't feel what I felt. They didn't hear the thumping, didn't see the silhouettes. They didn't know that something watched them from the shadows of my holds, waiting for them to leave, They searched for hours, their presence a brief disturbance in my solitude, then left me to the sea once more. Days turned to weeks, and the presence grew stronger. The thumping returned, now accompanied by whispers, soft, unintelligible, like voices carried on the wind. They came from the rice, from the sacks that bulged unnaturally, as if something moved within them. I felt my hull shift, my weight uneven, as if the cargo itself was alive. One night, a sack burst open, spilling rice across my hold. But it wasn't just rice. Something else tumbled out, a shape, small and glistening, like a fish, but wrong, its eyes too large, its limbs too many. It scuttled into the shadows before I could understand it, but its presence lingered, a stain on my steel. The sea grew restless, its currents pulling me in circles as if toying with me. Storms came, lashing my deck with rain that felt like needles. The silhouettes multiplied, their movements frantic as if drawn by the tempests. They climbed my masts, clung to my rails, their forms dissolving and reforming in the spray. I felt their anger, their desperation, as if they were bound to me, trapped as I was. The thumping grew louder, faster, a drumbeat of dread that shook my frame. I wanted to sink, to let the sea claim me fully, but I was too stubborn, my steel too unyielding. Then, in late April 2006, they came for me again. A salvage tug approached, its engine steady, its purpose clear. They towed me to Weipa, their hands stripping me of my pollutants, fuel and oil, the lifeblood I no longer needed. I felt their machines probing my holds, their voices discussing my fate. They didn't know about the presence, didn't sense the eyes watching from the dark. They saw only a derelict tanker, a problem to be solved. On April 21st, 2006, they towed me back to sea, to deeper waters where the light couldn't reach. I felt the charges they placed, the explosives that would end me. When they detonated, my hull tore open, the sea rushing in like a hungry beast. As I sank, the thumping stopped. The silhouettes vanished, swallowed by the dark. The whispers fell silent, drowned by the weight of the ocean. Thought I was free, released from whatever haunted me. But as my bow touched the seabed, I felt it again, a pulse, faint but undeniable, deep within my holds. The rice, the sacks, the things inside them, they were still there, waiting. The sea had claimed me, but it hadn't claimed them. They were part of me now, bound to my steel, my story unfinished.